The desert stretched endlessly under the Nevada sun, its golden sands hiding secrets that humanity had forgotten long ago. Deep beneath the surface, in a facility that existed on no official map, Dr. Lisa Morgan stared at the impossible object before her. The pod was massive, easily 20 feet long and covered in symbols that hurt to look at for too long. They seemed to shift and change when she blinked, as if they existed in more dimensions than her eyes could process. Lisa had been studying ancient artifacts for 15 years, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this discovery. Her team had found it 3 days ago, while drilling for geological samples. The drill bit had struck something that should not exist 200 feet below the desert floor. When they excavated the site, they found this crystalline pod, perfectly preserved and humming with energy that their instruments could barely measure. Lisa reached out carefully and touched the surface. It was neither hot nor cold, existing at exactly body temperature no matter what the environment around it demanded. Inside the translucent material, she could see a figure, a woman, or something that looked like a woman floating in suspended animation. The being inside had features that were almost human but not quite. Her ears tapered to elegant points. Her bone structure was too perfect, too symmetrical to be natural. Silver hair floated around her face like a halo frozen in time. She wore armor that seemed to be made of living metal, flowing across her body in patterns that defied earthly engineering. Lisa checked her tablet again, reviewing the energy readings. The power signature coming from the pod was astronomical. Whatever technology kept this being alive had been running for longer than human civilization had existed. Carbon dating of the surrounding rock suggested the pod had been here for at least 10,000 years, possibly much longer. She turned to her assistant, Dr. Claire Bennett, who was monitoring the scanning equipment across the room. Claire was young, brilliant, and currently looked terrified as she stared at her screen. Claire spoke without looking up, her voice tight with fear. "The readings are spiking. Something is activating the pod." Lisa hurried over to check the displays. Claire was right. The energy output had doubled in the last 30 seconds and was still climbing. Alarms began to sound throughout the facility as systems detected the surge. Above them, far above the Earth's atmosphere, space itself began to tear open. Reality split like fabric being ripped apart, and through the wounds in space-time, ships began to emerge. Not one or two vessels, but thousands of them, appearing in perfect military formation. The Calrathian Empire had arrived. Their fleet consisted of 9,700 warships, each one larger than Earth's biggest aircraft carrier. The vessels were dark and angular, covered in weapons that could crack planets. Their shields glowed with ominous red energy, and their engines burned with power drawn from dying stars. Admiral Vexcalar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Worldbreaker, and gazed at the primitive blue planet before him. His species had conquered 847 worlds across 200 star systems. This would be number 848, and it would be easy. Scans showed a civilization that had barely left its own moon, still using chemical rockets and primitive nuclear weapons. The Admiral was 12 feet tall, covered in bioengineered armor that was grafted to his very bones. His four eyes gleamed with anticipation of another easy victory. His species had perfected war across 10,000 years of conquest. These humans would surrender or die like all the others before them. He gave the order to send a message. His communications officer transmitted a simple declaration toward Earth in every language the Calrathians had cataloged from intercepted broadcasts. Surrender or be eradicated. You have 48 hours. No response was expected or wanted. The Calrathians had given ultimatums to hundreds of species before. None had ever successfully resisted. Back on Earth, chaos erupted. Every space agency, every military installation, every government building received the same message simultaneously. The transmission overrode every communication system on the planet, appearing on phones, televisions, computers, and even old radio sets. At the United Earth Defense Headquarters in Geneva, Commander Kate Sullivan stared at the tactical display showing the alien fleet. She had spent 20 years in the military, rising through ranks by being smart, tough, and uncompromising. But nothing in her training had prepared her for this moment. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, was working frantically at her station, trying to coordinate responses from military forces around the world. Amy was one of the best pilots humanity had ever produced. with reflexes that bordered on superhuman and an ability to think 3 moves ahead in any combat situation. Right now she looked as overwhelmed as Kate felt. Communications were flooding in from every nation. President Margaret Hayes was demanding options. General Nicole Foster wanted to launch an immediate counterstrike. Scientists were begging for time to study the alien technology. And nobody, absolutely nobody, had any idea how to fight an enemy with such overwhelming technological superiority. Kate made a decision. She ordered every available military asset to prepare for combat, while simultaneously trying to buy time through negotiation. It was a desperate play, but it was all they had. She dispatched teams to attempt communication with the alien fleet, while mobilizing Earth's defenses for what would likely be a futile battle. Deep in the Nevada facility, the pod's energy output reached critical levels. Lisa and Claire backed away as the crystalline surface began to crack. Lines of brilliant light split across its surface, and the humming sound rose to a frequency that made their teeth ache. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, the pod broke open. Energy exploded outward in a wave that knocked both scientists off their feet. When Lisa managed to sit up, her ears ringing, she saw the being from inside the pod standing in the center of the room. The woman was tall, nearly 7 feet, with an otherworldly grace that made her seem to float rather than stand. Her silver hair fell to her waist, and her eyes glowed with inner light that shifted between blue and violet. The armor she wore rippled like liquid before solidifying into plates that covered vital areas, while allowing perfect freedom of movement. She looked around the room, taking in the computers, the lights, the modern equipment with an expression of confusion. Then her gaze fell on Lisa, and something in those ancient eyes softened slightly. The being spoke, her voice musical but speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes and distant thunder. Lisa slowly got to her feet, holding her hands out in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. She tried English first, then Mandarin, then Spanish. Nothing registered on the mysterious woman's face. They had no common language, separated by millennia and possibly by species origin. Then Claire gasped and pointed at one of the monitors showing the feed from satellites tracking the alien fleet. The being turned to look at the screen, and her entire demeanor changed instantly. The confusion vanished, replaced by recognition and fury. Her body tensed like a predator about to strike. She said something in her ancient tongue, the translation software managing to catch just one word through the complex grammar and unknown vocabulary: Calrathians. The being knew the invaders. More than that, she recognized them as enemies. Lisa's mind raced with implications. This woman had been in stasis for 10,000 years. Had the Calrathians tried to invade Earth before? Had there been a war that humanity never knew about? The woman moved with fluid grace to the back of the pod chamber, where another object sat that Lisa had barely noticed before. It was an egg, or something like an egg, about 5 feet tall and made of the same crystalline material as the pod. The woman placed both hands on its surface and spoke again in her ancient language, her tone gentle now, almost loving. The egg responded to her touch. Cracks appeared across its surface, spreading rapidly. Lisa watched in amazement as the shell broke apart and something emerged from within. At first she thought it was a lizard, but as it unfolded itself, she realized the truth. It was a dragon. The creature was small, barely the size of a large dog, but there was no mistaking what it was. It had 4 legs, 2 wings, a long serpentine neck and tail, and scales that shimmered with colors that did not exist in any earthly spectrum. Its eyes were intelligent, far too intelligent for any animal, and they glowed with the same inner light as the woman's eyes. The dragon chirped and climbed onto the woman's shoulder, wrapping its tail around her neck for balance. The woman smiled, the first genuine emotion Lisa had seen cross her face, and stroked the dragon's head gently. The bond between them was obvious, deep, and ancient. Claire was already on her radio, calling for security and alerting the facility director. Lisa knew they needed to act fast. The alien fleet gave Earth 48 hours. Somehow, impossibly, this mysterious woman and her dragon might be the key to survival. But first, they needed to find a way to communicate. Lisa grabbed her tablet and pulled up a basic pictographic interface. She started with simple concepts using images and symbols that crossed language barriers. The woman watched with interest, her ancient mind quickly grasping what Lisa was attempting. She took the tablet and began to interact with it. her fingers moving across the screen with growing confidence. The dragon on her shoulder chirped again and spread its wings. Even at this young size, they spanned nearly 6 feet. The creature looked at the monitor showing the Calrathian fleet and let out a sound that was definitely not a chirp. It was a growl, deep and resonating, that promised violence and retribution. The woman looked at Lisa and then pointed at the screen showing the alien ships. She made a gesture, bringing her hands together and then exploding them outward in the universal symbol for destruction. Then she pointed at herself, at the dragon, and made the same gesture again. Lisa understood. The woman was not just familiar with the Calrathians. She had fought them before, and she intended to fight them again. In space, Admiral Vexcalar reviewed reports from his scout ships. The planet showed no signs of preparing any effective defense. A few chemical rockets were being readied, primitive satellites were being repositioned, but nothing that could threaten even a single Calrathian vessel. This would indeed be an easy conquest. He had no idea that deep beneath the desert sand an ancient guardian had awakened. He had no idea that the war his ancestors thought they had won 10,000 years ago was about to resume, and he had no idea that of his 9,700 ships, only 17 would survive to return home. The hours ticked away as Lisa worked desperately to build a bridge of understanding between humanity and the mysterious woman from the ancient pod. The facility had been placed on maximum security lockdown, with armed guards at every entrance, but Lisa insisted on continuing her work. Time was running out, and this strange being might be their only hope. The woman sat cross-legged on the floor, her dragon curled in her lap like an oversized cat. The creature had grown noticeably larger in just the few hours since hatching, now the size of a full-grown mastiff. Its scales shimmered as it breathed, and small wisps of what looked like starlight escaped from its nostrils with each exhale. Lisa had set up multiple screens showing mathematical sequences, musical patterns, and visual representations of physical concepts. The woman watched with intense focus, her ancient mind processing the information at speeds that seemed impossible. She would occasionally touch the screen and manipulate the patterns, showing Lisa that she understood and could build upon the concepts. Claire brought in a keyboard and speakers, thinking that music might help. The woman's eyes lit up when she heard the first notes. She hummed along, then began to sing in her own language. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, and somehow Lisa felt like she could almost understand the meaning behind the words, even without knowing the language itself. Through a combination of drawings, mathematical symbols, and gestures, they began to piece together the woman's story. She drew images of stars and planets, of great ships traveling between them, and of many different species living together in peace. Then she drew the Calrathians, aggressive and warlike, spreading across the galaxy like a plague. The woman drew herself and others like her, warriors created by an ancient alliance of peaceful species. They were guardians, defenders, protectors of worlds that could not yet defend themselves. She pointed to Earth on one of the screens and drew a circle around it, then pointed to herself. She had been assigned to protect this world. Lisa's heart raced as she understood. Earth had not been randomly chosen for protection. According to the drawings, this planet held something special, something unique in the galaxy. The woman drew images of DNA helixes that branched and changed in ways Lisa had never seen. Earth's evolutionary path was apparently unlike anything else in the known universe, full of potential that the ancient alliance wanted to preserve. The woman continued her story through pictures. The Calrathians had come before 10,000 years ago, with a fleet even larger than the current one. A great battle had been fought in Earth's orbit and on its surface. The woman and others like her had driven the invaders back, but at terrible cost. Most of the Guardians had died in the fighting. She drew herself entering the pod, placing the dragon egg beside her and going into deep sleep. She had set the pod to wake her if the Calrathians ever returned. The other Guardians who survived had gone to defend other worlds, leaving her as Earth's last protector. General Nicole Foster arrived at the facility with a full military escort. She was a tall woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too many wars. She had fought in conflicts across 3 continents and never backed down from a challenge. But the situation they now faced was beyond anything in her experience. Nicole watched through a one-way mirror as Lisa continued working with the ancient Guardian. She turned to her aide, Major Beth Carson, a combat specialist with more medals than most soldiers earned in 2 lifetimes. Beth was young but had proven herself in every battlefield she had touched. Right now, she looked as worried as Nicole felt. Nicole spoke quietly to Beth. "We need to know what she can do. We need to know if she can actually help us fight these aliens. We have less than 40 hours before they attack." Beth nodded and pulled up tactical displays on her tablet. They showed Earth's military forces mobilizing worldwide. Every fighter jet, every warship, every soldier was being prepared for battle. Nuclear missiles were being readied in silos. Experimental weapons that had never been tested in real combat were being loaded onto platforms. It still would not be enough, not against 9,700 advanced warships. Inside the communication room, the woman suddenly stood up. Her dragon leaped from her lap and landed gracefully on the floor, now large enough that its shoulders reached Lisa's waist. The woman walked to the wall of the pod chamber and placed her hand against it. The wall rippled like water and then became transparent, revealing a hidden passage beyond. Lisa called for the others, and soon a group including Nicole, Beth, Claire, and a dozen soldiers were following the mysterious woman down a corridor that should not exist. The passage stretched deep into the earth, its walls glowing with soft light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. They walked for what felt like miles, though instruments showed they had only gone a few hundred yards. Space itself seemed to fold and compress around them, making impossible distances traversable. The dragon trotted alongside its bonded partner, growing larger with each step. By the time they reached the end of the passage, it was the size of a horse. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that took everyone's breath away. It was enormous, easily the size of several football fields, and it was filled with technology. Weapons of every size and shape lined the walls. Suits of armor stood in neat rows like sleeping soldiers. Vehicles that defied description sat waiting for pilots who had been dead for millennia. And in the center of it all was a crystalline pillar that reached from floor to ceiling, pulsing with information. The woman walked to the pillar and placed both hands on it. The crystal responded, lighting up with images and symbols that flowed across its surface. She gestured for Lisa to approach, and when the scientist touched the pillar, information flooded directly into her mind. Lisa gasped as knowledge poured into her consciousness. She saw battles fought across 100 worlds. She witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. She learned tactics and strategies developed over thousands of years of warfare. And she understood, truly understood what the Calrathians were and how they could be defeated. The woman turned to face the assembled humans and spoke in their language for the first time. The words came slowly, pulled from Lisa's mind through their connection to the pillar. Her name was Elindra, guardian of Earth, defender of humanity's future. The dragon was Varathix, her bonded companion, a stellar dragon capable of surviving and fighting in the vacuum of space. Elindra explained that the weapons in this chamber were designed to fight the Calrathians. The armor would protect human soldiers and enhance their abilities. The vehicles could travel through space and atmosphere with equal ease. But most importantly, the knowledge stored in the pillar contained everything humanity needed to know about their enemy. Nicole stepped forward and asked the question everyone was thinking. Could they win with these weapons? Could Earth actually defeat an invasion force of nearly 10,000 warships? Elindra's expression was grave as she responded. The weapons would help. The knowledge would give them an advantage. But victory was not guaranteed. She had fought the Calrathians before and knew their strength. They were brutal, efficient, and utterly without mercy. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and would not stop until Earth was theirs or until they were destroyed. But, Elindra continued, there was hope. Humanity possessed something the Calrathians did not understand and could not replicate. They had the ability to adapt and innovate at speeds that terrified the older species of the galaxy. What took other civilizations centuries to learn, humans could master in years or even months. Combined with the ancient weapons and Elindra's guidance, they had a chance. Varathix roared, and the sound echoed through the massive chamber. The dragon was now the size of a small house, its growth accelerating as it absorbed energy from the ancient technology surrounding them. Its wings, when fully extended, spanned 40 feet. Fire that burned with colors impossible in nature flickered between its teeth. Elindra explained that Varathix was reaching maturity far faster than normal because of the emergency. Stellar dragons could sense danger to their bonded partners and would force their GR out to provide protection. Within another day, Varathix would be large enough to fight alongside her in space, to burn enemy ships with stellar fire, and tear through their hulls with claws sharper than any known material. The group spent the next several hours cataloging the weapons and beginning to train with them. Beth discovered that the armor responded to thoughts, shifting its form to accommodate different body types and combat styles. When she put on one of the suits, it flowed over her body like liquid before hardening into protective plates that somehow weighed nothing at all. Lisa worked with Claire and other scientists to interface the ancient computers with Earth's technology. They found that the systems were surprisingly compatible, as if they had been designed to work with whatever civilization might discover them. Information began flowing from the ancient database into Earth's networks, spreading tactical data to military commanders around the world. Captain Amy Rodriguez, who had been called in from United Earth Defense Headquarters, tested one of the ancient fighter craft. The vehicle was sleek and angular, with no visible engines or weapons ports, but when Amy climbed into the cockpit and touched the controls, the ship came alive. It lifted off the ground without a sound and moved with a grace that made her laugh with delight. This was technology beyond anything humanity had dreamed of creating. President Margaret Hayes arrived at the facility 18 hours before the Calrathian deadline expired. She was a woman who had risen to power through intelligence and diplomacy, always preferring negotiation to conflict. But she recognized when force was the only option left. She listened to Alindra's briefing and made her decision quickly. Margaret authorized the immediate distribution of the ancient weapons to Earth's military forces. She ordered all available personnel to begin training with the new technology, and she gave Nicole complete authority to coordinate the defense of Earth using whatever means necessary. The deadline approached with terrifying speed. Around the world, people watched the skies with fear and determination. They had been given hope by the discovery of the ancient Guardian and her weapons, but they also knew the odds they faced. Even with advanced technology, they were still outnumbered and outgunned. In orbit above Earth, Admiral Vexcalar prepared his fleet for the assault. He had received reports of unusual energy signatures coming from the planet's surface, but he dismissed them as primitive attempts at weapon development. Nothing these humans could create in 2 days would make any difference against the might of the Calrathian Empire. The 48 hours expired. The invasion began. Calrathian warships broke formation and accelerated toward Earth, their weapons charging for the first devastating barrage. They targeted major cities first, intending to break humanity's will to resist with overwhelming displays of power. Beams of concentrated energy lanced down from space, bright enough to blind anyone who looked directly at them. But this time, Earth was not defenseless. Alindra stood on the surface of the Nevada desert with Verathix beside her, now grown to the size of a large building. She wore her ancient armor, and in her hands she held weapons that had not been used in 10,000 years. Around her, human soldiers in their new armor stood ready, no longer afraid but eager to show the invaders what humanity could do when pushed to the edge. Verathix spread his wings and roared a challenge that echoed across the planet and into space itself. The stellar dragon launched into the sky, his bonded partner riding on his back, and the battle for Earth truly began. Verathix pierced the atmosphere like a comet of living fire, his massive wings propelling him toward the descending Calrathian warships with impossible speed. Alindra crouched on his back, her armor gleaming in the sunlight, her weapons charged and ready. She had waited 10,000 years for this moment, and now that it had arrived, she felt no fear, only purpose. The first Calrathian cruiser to enter weapons range never saw them coming. Verathix exhaled a stream of stellar fire that burned hotter than the surface of the sun. The beam struck the ship's shields and simply passed through them as if they did not exist. The ancient dragon's fire was designed to burn the Calrathians specifically, tuned to frequencies that their technology could not block. The cruiser's hull melted like wax under a blowtorch. Explosions rippled across its surface as internal systems overloaded and detonated. Within seconds, the massive warship was an expanding cloud of debris and gas. One ship down, 9699 to go. On the ground, human forces watched in amazement as their mysterious guardian proved she was more than just legend. Major Beth Carson stood in her ancient armor on a rooftop in New York City, watching Calrathian landing craft descend toward Manhattan. She held a phase rifle that hummed with power, surrounded by 24 soldiers who had trained for less than a day with their new weapons. Beth gave orders calmly despite the chaos around them. She told her troops to aim for the engine clusters on the landing craft, to fire in controlled bursts, and to trust the armor to protect them. The soldiers nodded, their faces set with grim determination. They were terrified but ready. The first landing craft touched down in Central Park, its boarding ramps dropping to release Calrathian shock troops. The aliens were massive, each one over 8 feet tall and covered in biomechanical armor that made them look more machine than living creature. They carried weapons that could vaporize a human with a single shot. Beth fired first. Her phase rifle's beam struck the lead Calrathian soldier and passed through his armor like it was paper. The alien fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. The other soldiers in her unit opened fire, and more Calrathians dropped. The invaders had expected easy prey, but instead found themselves facing weapons they had not encountered in millennia. The battle for New York became a desperate close-quarters fight. Calrathian reinforcements poured from multiple landing craft while human forces used the ancient weapons to hold them back. Beth moved through the chaos like a dancer, her armor making her faster and stronger than any human had a right to be. She dodged energy blasts that would have killed her instantly, and returned fire with devastating accuracy. In space, Elindra and Varathix tore through the Calrathian formation like wolves among sheep. The dragon banked hard to avoid return fire from 3 destroyers, then twisted in midair to release another burst of stellar flame. 2 of the destroyers exploded simultaneously. The third managed to raise its shields, but Elindra leaped from Varathix's back, sailed through the vacuum of space protected by her armor's energy field, and landed on the destroyer's hull. She drew her blade, a weapon forged from collapsed star matter, and drove it into the ship's armor. The metal parted like water as she cut a path to the engine core. 30 seconds later, she was back on Varathix's. Back and the destroyer was breaking apart behind them. Admiral Vexcalar watched from the bridge of the Worldbreaker, as his tactical display showed ships disappearing from the formation. 3 cruisers gone, 5 destroyers destroyed, 2 frigates disabled. The losses were minimal compared to his fleet size, but the speed at which they were occurring was alarming. Then his sensors officer called out readings that made the Admiral's blood run cold. The energy signatures matched records from the ancient war, the conflict that had happened so long ago that most Calrathians believed it was myth. The Guardian was real. The Stellar Dragon was real. And they were fighting with the same fury that had driven his ancestors from this world 10,000 years before. Vexcalar immediately changed his strategy. He ordered his ships to stop the scattered assault and reform into defensive formations. He dispatched his elite hunter squadrons to deal with the dragon and its rider, and he authorized the use of planet-killer weapons, massive bombs designed to crack a world's crust and render it uninhabitable. The Admiral was willing to destroy Earth rather than face another humiliating defeat at the hands of the Guardians. The Calrathian Empire did not accept losses. They would take this world or leave it as a burned husk, but they would not retreat. Back on Earth, Captain Amy Rodriguez led a squadron of ancient fighters into the atmosphere. The ships moved with grace that made modern aircraft look clumsy by comparison. Amy and her pilots had practiced for less than 12 hours, but the fighters seemed to anticipate their needs, responding to thought as much as to physical controls. They engaged Calrathian fighters over the Pacific Ocean, and the battle that followed was unlike anything in human history. The ancient ships were faster, more maneuverable, and armed with weapons that could punch through enemy shields with ease. Amy flew with skill born of years of combat experience, enhanced by technology that made her reflexes superhuman. She destroyed 3 enemy fighters in the first minute of combat. Her wingman, Lieutenant Sophie Bennett, matched her kill count and was laughing with fierce joy over the communication channel. Sophie had always loved flying more than anything else in life, and now she was piloting technology that let her dance through the sky like a bird riding the wind. The squadron destroyed 24 Calrathian fighters without losing a single pilot. The enemy simply could not match the combination of human adaptability and ancient technology. Amy led her team back toward a Calrathian carrier that was deploying more fighters, and they proceeded to methodically dismantle its defenses. On the ground in London, Dr. Christine Walsh coordinated the defense from a command center deep underground. Christine was a physicist who had spent her career studying theoretical weapons, and now she found herself in charge of deploying actual alien technology in real combat. She worked with a team of scientists and military officers to track the battle and direct resources where they were needed most. Christine received reports of Calrathian forces landing in Moscow, Beijing, Cairo, and dozens of other cities. She dispatched teams equipped with ancient weapons to each location. She also coordinated with Commander Kate Sullivan at United Earth Defense Headquarters to ensure that conventional forces supported the efforts of troops using the Guardian technology. The integration of old and new weapons proved effective. Human tanks and artillery provided covering fire while soldiers in ancient armor engaged the enemy at close range. Fighter jets drew enemy fire while the ancient spacecraft struck from unexpected angles. Humanity was learning to fight as a unified force, combining everything they had into a cohesive defense. Varathix roared as he destroyed another Calrathian battlecruiser, his stellar fire carving through the massive ship's core. Elindra felt his joy through their bond, the pure satisfaction of a predator doing what it was born to do. The dragon had grown even larger during the battle, now spanning nearly 200 feet from nose to tail. His power was reaching its peak and he reveled in it, but Elindra also felt something else through their connection, a warning. Her enhanced senses detected the energy buildup of the planet-killer bombs being charged aboard Calrathian carriers. She understood immediately what the Admiral intended. If he could not conquer Earth, he would destroy it. She urged Varathix toward the nearest carrier, the one showing the highest energy readings. They had to stop those weapons from launching, had to prevent the Calrathians from turning Earth into a lifeless rock. The dragon responded instantly, folding his wings and diving toward the massive vessel with terrifying speed. Calrathian hunter squadrons intercepted them halfway. These were the elite pilots of the Empire, flying ships designed specifically to kill large targets like stellar dragons. They swarmed around Varathix, firing weapons that actually penetrated his shields and scored hits on his armored scales. Elindra returned fire with every weapon she carried, destroying hunter ships left and right, but there were too many of them. Varathix twisted and turned, snapping at attackers with jaws that could crush steel, but for the first time since the battle began, they were in danger of being overwhelmed. Then Amy and her squadron arrived, ancient fighters screaming out of Earth's atmosphere to engage the hunters. The human pilots flew with reckless courage, drawing fire away from Varathix and giving him room to maneuver. Sophie destroyed the hunter squadron leader with a perfect shot that drilled through his cockpit. The remaining enemy pilots broke formation, suddenly uncertain. Varathix seized the opportunity and accelerated toward the carrier. Elindra could see the planet-killer bomb being loaded into a launch tube, could calculate that they had less than a minute before it fired. She made a split-second decision and told Amy to pull her squadron back, to get clear of the blast radius. Amy protested, saying she and her pilots could help, but Elindra was firm. What she was about to do would create an explosion that could damage even the ancient fighters. The human captain reluctantly ordered her squadron to retreat, though Elindra could hear the frustration in her voice. Varathix crashed into the carrier's hull with the force of a meteor strike. His claws tore through armor plating as he climbed across the ship's surface toward the launch tube. Elindra leaped from his back and ran along the hull, her magnetic boots keeping her attached to the metal. She reached the tube just as the bomb's launch sequence initiated. There was no time for subtlety. Elindra drove her star-forged blade into the launch mechanism and channeled all her energy into the weapon. The blade overloaded, releasing power equivalent to a small nuclear explosion. The launch tube ruptured, the bomb detonated inside the carrier, and the entire massive ship began to tear itself apart. Varathix grabbed Elindra in his claws and flew desperately away from the expanding explosion. The carrier's destruction triggered a chain reaction that destroyed 2 nearby destroyers and damaged a dozen other ships. The blast lit up Earth's orbit like a second sun for several seconds. When the light faded, Varathix was badly burned but alive. Elindra was unconscious in his grasp, her armor cracked and her body pushed beyond its limits. The dragon flew toward Earth's surface, seeking a safe place to land and recover. Behind them, the Calrathian fleet was in chaos, ships breaking formation and commanders screaming contradictory orders. Admiral Vexcalar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. He had lost over 100 ships in less than 3 hours of combat. His planet-killer bomb had been destroyed before it could launch. His elite hunters had been beaten by primitive humans flying ancient technology, and the Guardian, though apparently injured, was still alive. For the first time in his long military career, the Admiral felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. These humans were not behaving like the hundreds of other species the Calrathians had conquered. They adapted too quickly, fought too fiercely, refused to accept defeat even when vastly outnumbered. Combined with the Guardians' technology and the Stellar Dragon's power, they represented a threat the Empire had not faced in millennia. Vexikalar made a decision. He would not underestimate these defenders again. He recalled all landing forces, consolidated his fleet into a single overwhelming formation, and prepared for a coordinated assault that would crush all resistance. The humans had won the first engagement, but the war was far from over. On Earth, humans celebrated their initial victory even as they tended their wounded and prepared for the next attack. They had proven they could fight back, could make the invaders bleed, but everyone knew the Calrathians still had overwhelming numerical superiority. The real test was yet to come. Varathix descended toward the Nevada facility with Elindra cradled gently in his claws. The dragon's scales were scorched and cracked from the carrier explosion, but he paid no attention to his own injuries. His only concern was for his bonded partner, whose breathing was shallow and whose armor had stopped glowing with protective energy. Lisa and Claire waited on the landing pad as the massive dragon touched down. Medical teams rushed forward with equipment, though nobody was certain if human medicine could help someone like Elindra. Lisa climbed onto Varathix's foreleg to reach the ancient guardian, checking her vital signs with trembling hands. Elindra's eyes opened slowly, glowing dimly compared to their usual brilliant light. She gripped Lisa's hand and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. She told the scientists that she would recover, but time was something they did not have. The Calrathians would regroup and attack with their full strength soon. Earth needed a devastating counterattack, something that would break the enemy's will to fight. Over the next 6 hours, as Elindra recovered in the facility's medical bay, she explained her plan to the assembled military leadership. General Nicole Foster, Commander Kate Sullivan, President Margaret Hayes, and a dozen other high-ranking officials listened with growing concern as the ancient warrior laid out what needed to happen. Elindra proposed a direct assault on the Worldbreaker, Admiral Vexikalar's flagship. The massive vessel was the nerve center of the entire Calrathian fleet. If they could destroy it, the invasion force would fall into chaos as secondary commanders fought over who should take control. The Calrathians were efficient warriors but terrible at adapting when their chain of command broke down. Nicole immediately saw the problem with this plan. The Worldbreaker was surrounded by hundreds of warships, all positioned to protect their admiral. It would be suicide to attempt a direct assault. They would be torn apart before getting within weapons range. Elindra agreed that it seemed impossible, which was exactly why they had to do it. The Calrathians would never expect such a bold attack. But there was another issue, one that made even the fearless Guardian hesitate before speaking. Varathix was not yet strong enough to face the Worldbreaker's defenses. The dragon was powerful, larger and more dangerous than any weapon humanity had ever created. But he was still young, still growing into his full potential as a stellar dragon. To attack the flagship now would mean his death and Elindra's death, and the failure of Earth's defense. They needed Varathix to complete his transformation into a fully mature stellar dragon. Lisa asked how long that would take, hoping the answer would be measured in hours or days. Elindra's response crushed that hope. Under normal circumstances, Varathix would need another 50 years to reach full maturity. His species grew slowly, accumulating power over decades and centuries until they became nearly unstoppable forces of nature. But there was another way, one that Elindra had hoped to avoid. She could share her own life essence with Varathix, accelerating his growth to completion in a matter of hours. The process would drain centuries from her immortal lifespan. It might even kill her if she gave too much. But it was the only way to give Earth a fighting chance. Claire protested immediately, saying, Here had to be another option. They could wait, could find a different strategy, could give Varathix time to grow naturally. But Elindra shook her head gently. The Calrathians would not wait. They would attack again within a day. And next time they would not underestimate humanity. Admiral Vexikalar was many things, but he was not stupid. He would come with overwhelming force and crush all resistance. President Margaret Hayes looked at the ancient guardian with deep sadness and asked if she was certain this was what she wanted to do. Elindra smiled, the expression tired but genuine. She said she had lived for over 10,000 years, sleeping away most of that time. In the past few days, she had seen something that made her want to fight and sacrifice. She had seen humanity refuse to surrender even when facing impossible odds. She had watched humans adapt and learn and grow stronger with every passing hour. She had found hope again after millennia of simply existing. Earth had given her a reason to live. Now she would give Earth a reason to survive. The ritual would take place in orbit, where Varathics could draw energy from the sun and cosmic radiation as Elindra channeled her essence into him. But they needed time and space to complete the transformation without interruption. That meant someone would have to draw the Calrathian fleet away from their position. Commander Helen Price volunteered immediately. Helen was a naval officer who had commanded carrier groups in both the Atlantic and Pacific. She was tough, experienced, and completely willing to risk her life if it meant giving Elindra and Varathics the time they needed. She proposed leading a diversionary assault with every ship they could spare. The plan came together quickly. Helen would take 50 ancient fighters and 20 modified human spacecraft, all equipped with the Guardian technology. They would strike at the Calrathian fleet's northern flank, making as much noise and causing as much damage as possible. The enemy would have to respond to such a threat, pulling ships away from their defensive formation around the world breaker. While the Calrathians were distracted, Elindra and Varathics would perform the transformation ritual on the opposite side of Earth. Once the dragon reached full maturity, they would strike at the flagship before the enemy could reposition their forces. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it was the best chance they had. Major Beth Carson insisted on joining Helen's diversionary force. She had proven herself in ground combat and wanted to test the ancient fighters in a real space battle. Captain Amy Rodriguez and Lieutenant Sophie Bennett also volunteered, eager to face the enemy again. Within 2 hours, they had assembled a strike force of humanity's best pilots, each one trained in the ancient technology and ready to die if necessary. The assault began at dawn. Helen led her squadron up through the atmosphere and straight toward the Calrathian fleet's northern formation. They did not try to hide or use stealth. Instead, they announced their presence with a massive coordinated strike on a Calrathian battleship. Their combined firepower overwhelming, its shields and turning it into an expanding ball of plasma. Admiral Vexcalar received the alert on his bridge and immediately diverted 300 ships to intercept the human attack. He was not falling for a simple diversion, but he also could not allow the humans to attack his fleet unopposed. The ships he sent were more than enough to deal with 50 fighters, no matter how advanced their technology. On the other side of Earth, Elindra and Varathics rose into the darkness of space. The dragon spread his wings wide, each one now spanning over 300 feet. Elindra floated before him, her armor glowing with accumulated power. Around them, the sun bathed everything in golden light that seemed to strengthen the ancient guardian. She placed both hands on Varathics' massive head and began to chant in her ancient language. The words were older than human civilization, a ritual passed down through countless generations of guardians and their bonded companions. Power began to flow from Elindra into the dragon, a visible stream of energy that looked like liquid starlight. Varathics roared, but it was not a sound of pain. It was triumph and joy and fierce anticipation of what was to come. His body began to change, to grow, to transform into something magnificent and terrible. His scales hardened into armor stronger than any metal forged by mortal hands. His wings expanded until they could block out the sun. His fire burned hotter, shifting from red to blue to white to colors that had no names in any earthly language. Elindra felt the years draining from her essence. Decades, then centuries, flowed out of her immortal life and into her bonded companion. Her silver hair, which had remained unchanged for 10,000 years, began to show hints of age. Lines appeared at the corners of her eyes. Her hands, which had been smooth and youthful, became marked with the subtle signs of time's passage. But she did not stop. She poured more and more of herself into Varathics, determined to see him reach his full potential no matter the cost. The dragon grew larger still until he was over 500 feet long, his body radiating power that could be detected from Earth's surface. He had become something beyond a mere creature, beyond even what most stellar dragons achieved. He had become a living weapon of cosmic proportions. When the ritual finally ended, Elindra collapsed backward into space. Varathics caught her gently, his now massive form cradling her like a parent protecting a child. She looked older than before, as if several hundred years had been taken from her lifespan in a single hour, but she was alive, conscious and smiling at what they had accomplished together. Helen's diversionary force was fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. 3 of her pilots had already been killed, their ancient fighters torn apart by concentrated Calrathian fire. Amy destroyed 2 enemy cruisers with brilliant flying and perfect shots, but even she could not hold back the tide forever. They needed Elindra and Varathix to strike soon, or they would all die buying time that accomplished nothing. Then readings on every ship, both human and Calrathian, spiked off the charts. Something was coming, something so powerful that it distorted space itself. The Calrathian ships closest to Earth's southern orbit simply vanished, vaporized by fire that burned with the heart of stars. Varathix emerged from behind the planet like a god of ancient mythology. His wings, now spanning nearly a mile, glowed with energy drawn from the sun itself. His eyes burned with intelligence and fury. And on his back, Elindra sat in armor that had transformed with her sacrifice, becoming darker and more ornate, marked with symbols that represented every year she had given to save Earth. The fully mature stellar dragon accelerated toward the world breaker, and ships that tried to intercept him were simply swept aside. His stellar fire carved through entire squadrons. His claws tore battleships in half. His tail smashed cruisers like toys. The Calrathians had faced stellar dragons before, but never one this powerful. Never one bonded to a guardian who had sacrificed so much for a single purpose. Admiral Vexcalar watched in horror as Varathix destroyed the defensive line around his flagship in less than 5 minutes. He ordered all ships to converge on the dragon, to overwhelm it with numbers, but the creature was too fast and too powerful. Ships exploded left and right, their shields useless against the ancient fire. Varathix crashed into the Worldbreaker's shields with enough force to make the massive flagship shudder. The shields held for exactly 3 seconds before collapsing under the assault. Elindra leaped from her dragon's back and landed on the hull, her boots magnetizing to keep her attached to the metal surface. She walked toward the nearest airlock, her blade drawn and glowing with power. Calrathian security forces inside the ship mobilized to stop her, but they might as well have tried to stop a hurricane. Elindra cut through the airlock door like it was paper and stepped inside the flagship. What followed was a battle that would become legend. Elindra fought her way through corridor after corridor, facing hundreds of Calrathian warriors. Her blade moved faster than the eye could follow. Her armor absorbed shots that would have killed anyone else. Her movements were efficient and deadly, wasting no energy, showing no mercy to those who had come to destroy her world. She reached the command bridge in 20 minutes, leaving a trail of defeated warriors behind her. The doors to the bridge exploded inward, and Elindra stepped through the smoke to face Admiral Vexcalar. The admiral was enormous even for his species, nearly 13 feet tall and covered in battle armor that had served him through 100 campaigns. He drew an energy sword that crackled with power and challenged Elindra to single combat, as was the tradition of his people. They fought in the center of the bridge while the crew watched in terrified silence. Vexcalar was strong and skilled, a warrior who had never lost a duel. But Elindra had been fighting for 10,000 years. She had trained with the greatest warriors of 100 species, and she was protecting something she loved. The duel lasted exactly 90 seconds. Elindra's blade found the gap in the admiral's armor and pressed against his throat. He froze, knowing that one more inch would end his life. His crew reached for weapons, but Elindra's voice stopped them. She said that if anyone moved, the admiral would die immediately. Vexcalar expected death. It was what his people did to defeated enemies. But Elindra surprised him by lowering her blade slightly and making an offer. She would spare his life and allow him to leave with his remaining ships, but only on one condition. He had to watch and understand what humanity had become. Admiral Vexcalar stood frozen on his own bridge, the blade of an ancient guardian pressed against his throat. His crew remained motionless, their weapons lowered but ready. The massive Calrathian warrior had never experienced defeat like this, had never imagined a single being could board his flagship and reach the command center alone. Elindra spoke calmly, her voice carrying authority that came from 10,000 years of experience. She told the admiral that she would spare his life, but he must witness what was about to happen. He must see what humanity had become in just 3 days of fighting. He must understand that Earth was no longer a defenseless world waiting to be conquered. She reached up and activated the communication systems, overriding the security protocols with ease. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the battle raging outside the world breaker. Vexcalar watched as his fleet struggled against an enemy that refused to accept defeat. Commander Helen Price led her diversionary force with brilliant tactical precision. Though outnumbered 10-1, her pilots worked together seamlessly, using the ancient fighters in ways that maximized their advantages. They struck fast, hit hard, and vanished before the enemy could respond effectively. Captain Amy Rodriguez destroyed a destroyer with a shot that threaded through 3 other ships without hitting them, displaying skill that seemed impossible for someone who had been flying the ancient craft for less than 2 days. Major Beth Carson fought alongside Sophie Bennett, the 2 pilots moving in perfect synchronization, as if they had trained together for years instead of hours. They covered each other, shared targeting data, and combined their attacks to take down ships much larger than their fighters. The Calrathians had superior numbers, but humanity had something the invaders lacked: the ability to adapt and innovate in the middle of combat. On Earth's surface, ground forces led by soldiers equipped with the ancient armor repelled the last Calrathian landing parties. The aliens found themselves fighting defenders who were faster, stronger, and better armed than should be possible for such a primitive species. Every battle, every engagement, showed the Calrathians that they had gravely underestimated their enemy. Dr. Christine Walsh coordinated the planetary defense network from her underground command center. She had integrated the ancient technology with Earth's existing systems, creating a hybrid network that combined the best of both worlds. Satellites equipped with graviton weapons tracked enemy ships. Ground-based artillery using phase technology targeted landing craft. And the entire operation was managed by humans who learned and improved with every passing minute. Elindra gestured to the view screen and told Admiral Vexcalar to watch carefully. She explained that 3 days ago, humanity had no idea they were not alone in the universe. They had no weapons capable of threatening an interstellar empire. They had no armor, no shields, no technology beyond their own limited inventions, and yet in just 72 hours they had learned to use weapons 10,000 years old, had trained themselves to fight in space, and had destroyed hundreds of Calrathian warships. The Admiral listened, his expression unreadable behind his armored faceplate. Elindra continued speaking, her voice growing stronger despite the exhaustion from her sacrifice. She told him that humanity possessed something rare in the galaxy: the ability to change rapidly, to learn from every mistake, to turn defeats into lessons that made them stronger. What took most species centuries to achieve, humans accomplished in days. She asked Vexcalar a simple question: what would happen if the Calrathian Empire continued this war? What would humanity be capable of in a week, a month, a year? How long before they reverse-engineered every piece of Calrathian technology? How long before they built their own fleet and brought the fight to the Empire's doorstep? The Admiral remained silent, but Elindra could see the calculations running behind his eyes. He was a military strategist, trained to assess threats and plan campaigns. And he was reaching the same conclusion she wanted him to reach. Humanity was not prey. They were predators awakening to their true potential. Outside the Worldbreaker, Verathix unleashed his full power against the Calrathian fleet. The mature stellar dragon moved through space like a force of nature, his fire burning hot enough to vaporize ships in seconds. His claws, each one the size of a building, tore through armor that was supposed to be indestructible. His tail swept through formations, scattering vessels like leaves in a storm. But Verathix was not mindlessly destroying everything in reach. He was being selective, targeting specific ships and driving others away from the Worldbreaker. He was creating a corridor, forcing the Calrathian fleet into a specific formation. Elindra had trained him for this, had taught him tactics during their centuries together. The dragon was not just her weapon. He was her partner, equally intelligent and equally dedicated to protecting Earth. The Calrathian fleet began to break apart under the coordinated assault. Ships that had maintained perfect military discipline for hours started making independent decisions. Commanders who lost contact with the flagship issued conflicting orders. Some vessels moved to defend the Worldbreaker, while others retreated to safer positions. The unity that made the Calrathians so effective in conquest was fracturing. Admiral Vexcalar saw his fleet falling into chaos and knew he had lost. His pride demanded he fight to the death, but his duty to his people demanded he preserve what forces remained. The Calrathian Empire could not afford to lose 9,700 ships to a single planet, no matter how strategically valuable that world might be. Elindra lowered her blade completely and stepped back from the Admiral. She told him she would keep her word. He could leave with whatever ships remained operational, but he would do so with a message to carry back to his empire. Earth was under the protection of a guardian and her stellar dragon. Any future invasion attempts would meet the same fate as this one. She made one additional requirement. 17 ships would be allowed to retreat intact, 17 vessels to return home and tell the story of what happened here. The rest of his fleet was already destroyed or crippled beyond repair, but those 17 would survive as witnesses. They would spread the word throughout the Calrathian Empire that Earth was no longer a target for conquest. Vex-Kalar asked why 17 specifically, and Elindra smiled grimly. Because 17 was enough to tell a story, but few enough to be humiliating. The Empire had sent 9,700 ships to invade a primitive world, and only 17 would return. That ratio would echo across the galaxy, a warning to any species that considered Earth easy prey. The Admiral gave orders for the retreat. Ships still capable of jumping to hyperspace began disengaging from combat and forming up for departure. The process was orderly at first, but as human forces pressed their advantage, the retreat became more desperate. Calrathian vessels abandoned damaged sister ships to save themselves. Pride gave way to survival instinct. Helen's diversionary force chased the fleeing ships, destroying several more before Elindra sent a message ordering them to let the survivors go. Amy wanted to press the attack, to finish off as many enemy vessels as possible, but she followed orders and pulled her squadron back. The ancient fighters formed a protective screen around Varathix and the Worldbreaker, ready to resume combat if the Calrathians changed their minds about retreating. In the end, exactly 17 Calrathian ships jumped to hyperspace and escaped Earth's system. They were a mix of cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels, carefully selected by Admiral Vex-Kalar to ensure a balanced force could make the journey home. Every other ship in the invasion fleet was either destroyed, damaged beyond repair, or deliberately left behind as tribute to Earth's victory. The Worldbreaker itself was the last to leave. Elindra returned to Varathix and allowed the flagship to depart with its admiral aboard. She could have destroyed it, could have killed Vex-Kalar and every member of his crew, but mercy served her purpose better than vengeance. The admiral would return home defeated but alive, forced to explain how a primitive world had shattered the myth of Calrathian invincibility. As the last enemy ship vanished into hyperspace, Earth erupted in celebration. Every city, every nation, every person who had watched the battle unfold through broadcasts felt the weight of fear lift from their shoulders. They had faced annihilation and survived. More than survived, they had won a victory that would be remembered for generations. But Elindra did not celebrate. She collapsed the moment the last ship departed, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion and damage from her sacrifice. Varathix caught her gently and descended toward the Nevada facility, his massive form blotting out the sun as he landed. Lisa and Claire rushed to help as medical teams swarmed around the fallen guardian. Elindra was alive but barely conscious, her life force depleted from channeling centuries of energy into Varathix. The dragon curled protectively around her, his eyes glowing with concern for his bonded partner. For 3 days, Elindra remained in a healing sleep while Earth Bigao,